The rancher stood motionless in the doorway of his empty house, staring at nothing. The ranch had become a graveyard of memories. Just 3 days ago, he had lowered his wife Martha and their 6-year-old boy Thomas into the earth, victims of the fever that swept through like wildfire. Arthur had survived, though he couldn't say why. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the creak of loose barn boards in the wind. He had stopped eating, stopped caring for the animals, stopped wanting to wake up each morning. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky the color of dried blood, a figure appeared on the ridge. She walked slowly, purposefully, carrying a woven basket, an Apache woman alone. Arthur watched her approach with hollow eyes, another dark omen in a world already stripped of light. Arthur forced himself to move, retrieving his rifle from beside the door. The woman stopped 20 feet from his porch, her weathered face calm beneath graying black hair. She was perhaps 50 winters old, her clothes a mix of traditional Apache dress and practical frontier wear. "Get off my land," Arthur said, his voice rough from days of silence. The woman looked at him, then at the dying garden beside the house where Martha's roses wilted brown and forgotten. She set down her basket and walked to the garden, kneeling in the dirt. "I said leave," Arthur repeated, raising the rifle halfway. The woman, Nita, continued her work, pulling dead stems with practiced hands. She moved like water, unhurried and certain. Arthur's grief was too heavy to sustain anger. He lowered the gun and retreated inside, leaving her to whatever fate the coming darkness would bring. Morning came against Arthur's will. Through his window, he saw the Apache woman already working. She had cleared a section of the garden, turning the soil with a broken hoe she must have found in the barn. Her movements were steady, methodical. She worked without rest through the heat of the day, stopping only to drink from the well. Arthur watched, expecting her to approach the house, to ask for food or payment. She never did. Instead, she gathered wild roots and plants from the prairie, cooking them over a small fire she built near the tool shed. For 3 days, this pattern continued. She mended the corral fence that had collapsed in last month's storm. She repaired the chicken coop door. She spent hours with his horse, the bay mare that hadn't been brushed since Martha died, speaking to it in soft Apache words while working tangles from its mane. On the 4th day, she began cleaning the well. Martha had always complained about the moss and debris that collected there. Nita hauled up bucket after bucket of murky water until it ran clear. She scrubbed the stone rim where Martha used to rest her hands. Arthur found himself standing at the window longer each day, watching this strange woman breathe life back into his dying ranch. She never looked at the house, never acknowledged his presence behind the glass. It was as if she existed in a different world, one where work had meaning and purpose. Arthur's suspicion began to shift into something else. Not gratitude exactly, but a reluctant recognition that she was undoing the decay he had welcomed. The need for flour and coffee finally forced Arthur to town. He saddled his horse, his hands fumbling with buckles he hadn't touched in over a week. The 5-mile ride to Coyote Creek felt longer. The town looked the same but felt different. People who had pressed his hand at the funeral now watched him from doorways and porches. At the general store, conversation stopped when he entered. Old Jim Bradley, who ran the place, served him quickly, barely meeting his eyes. As Arthur loaded his supplies, Sheriff Watson approached. "Arthur, need a word," the sheriff said, steering him toward the alley. "People been talking. Say you got an Apache woman living on your place." "She's working the land," Arthur said simply. "That's not how folks see it. You know how things are. The Apache wars might be winding down, but people here haven't forgotten the raids. The Paulson family lost their oldest boy just 2 years back. She's just one woman. She hasn't asked for anything." Watson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't matter what she's asked for. People are scared, Arthur, and scared people do stupid things. I'm telling you as a friend, send her on her way. You've had enough tragedy without inviting more." Arthur looked at the sheriff, this man who had helped carry Martha's coffin. "I'll handle my own business, Tom." The sheriff shook his head. "Your business becomes the town's business when it threatens the peace. That's all I'm saying." Arthur rode home with the warning sitting heavy in his chest. But when he arrived and saw Nita carefully tending the small vegetable plot behind the house, something in him resisted. Martha had tried 3 seasons to get tomatoes to grow there. Already Nita had cleared the weeds and built small mounds for planting. The sight of it, the sheer ordinary hope of it, made his throat tight. That evening, Arthur found her sitting by the graves. His first instinct was rage. How dare she intrude on that sacred space? But as he approached, he saw she had cleared away the scattered tumbleweeds and placed a single yellow wildflower on Thomas's small mound. She sat with her hands folded, lips moving in what might have been prayer. Arthur stopped, his anger dissolving into something raw and painful. Nita looked up at him. For the first time, their eyes truly met. "I had a son," she said in careful English. "The soldiers came to our camp. He was 7 winters. She touched the earth beside Thomas's grave. The ground holds them all the same." Arthur felt his knees weaken. He sat heavily beside her, not caring about propriety or the strangeness of it. "Thomas," he said, his voice breaking on the name. His name was Thomas. He liked to catch lizards, put them in his mother's sewing basket once. The words came like water through a broken dam. "Martha." She sang while she cooked. Couldn't carry a tune, but she sang anyway. They sat in silence as the sun set. Two strangers bound by the universal language of loss. When darkness approached, Nita rose and walked to her camping spot by the shed. Arthur returned to his empty house, but for the first time since the funeral, he lit a lamp. The darkness felt less absolute. The next morning brought change. Arthur emerged from the house carrying a plate of biscuits and salt pork. He set it on the porch railing and went to the barn. When he looked back, Nita was eating slowly, acknowledging the gift with a small nod. They began to work the ranch together, still in relative silence but with a shared purpose. She taught him which wild plants could supplement their diet. He showed her Martha's method for protecting young plants from rabbits. They fixed the roof of the chicken coop, Arthur holding boards while Nita hammered. In the evenings, they sometimes sat on opposite ends of the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains gold and red. 2 weeks passed this way. The ranch began to look less like a place of death and more like what it had been, a home. Arthur started eating regular meals. He shaved his beard and washed his clothes. The weight on his chest, while still present, no longer threatened to crush him with each breath. Nita never asked for anything beyond what he offered. She remained camped by the shed, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow didn't feel like distance at all. Then came the day Arthur had been dreading. He was repairing a harness in the barn when he heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. He stepped outside to find 5 men from town, led by Carl Brennan, who owned the neighboring ranch. Carl had always resented that Arthur had claimed the better water access. They were armed, their faces set with the kind of determination that came from fear and whiskey. "Stand aside, Arthur," Carl said. "We're here to solve your Indian problem." Arthur saw Nita by the garden, her back straight but her body tense. She had heard them coming. "There's no problem here," Arthur said, walking to position himself between the men and Nita. "You're not thinking clear," said Dale Morrison, the blacksmith. "Grief makes a man foolish. We're doing you a favor. The only favor you can do is leave my property." Carl shifted in his saddle, his hand moving to his pistol. "You'd protect a savage over your own kind." "I'd protect anyone who's shown me more kindness than you ever have," Arthur replied. His voice was steady, but inside his heart raced. He had no rifle, just the force of his conviction. "She's Apache," Carl spat. "They killed the Paulson boy, burned the Hendricks farm. She's one woman who lost her child to violence, same as I lost mine to fever. She's brought life back to this place while you bring nothing but hate. You're talking crazy, Arthur. Move or we move you." Arthur spread his feet wider, grounding himself. "You want to add murder to your conscience, Carl, because that's what this is. Not justice, not protection, just murder of an innocent woman." The standoff stretched taut. Arthur could see the uncertainty creeping into some of the men's faces. Dale Morrison, whose wife had helped prepare Martha's body for burial, looked uncomfortable. Young Pete Sanders, barely 20, kept glancing between Carl and Arthur. "This isn't what we came for," Pete said quietly. "Arthur's right. She's just one woman." "Shut up, boy." Carl snapped, but his authority was cracking. Arthur pressed on. "Look at this place. 2 weeks ago, it was dying like I was dying. She brought it back. She brought me back. If you can't see the good in that, then you're blinder than I was." Dale Morrison lowered his rifle. "Come on, Carl. This isn't worth it." One by one, the others followed suit. Carl sat alone in his righteousness, his face red with fury and embarrassment. "This isn't over, Arthur. When she brings trouble, it's on your head. I'll take that chance." Carl wheeled his horse around violently. The others followed, and soon their dust cloud disappeared toward town. Arthur stood watching until they were gone, his legs suddenly shaky. When he turned, Nita was standing behind him. Her dark eyes held an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, perhaps, mixed with something deeper. "You did not have to stand for me," she said. Yes, Arthur replied. I did. That night, for the first time, Arthur invited her to eat dinner inside the house. They sat at the table where he had shared countless meals with Martha and Thomas. The empty chairs no longer seemed to accuse him. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Nita helped wash the dishes. It felt both strange and natural, like a rhythm returning after being broken. When she left for her camp, Arthur gave her 2 thick blankets. The nights were getting colder. The next morning, Arthur woke to find Nita already packed. Her few belongings were bundled in her basket. She stood by the garden, watching the sunrise paint the mountains purple and gold. Arthur approached, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Your spirit is healing, she said without looking at him. The land lives again. You live again. My work is done. You could stay, Arthur said, though he understood she wouldn't. Her presence had been a season, necessary but temporary, like rain after drought. My path goes on, she replied. Yours continues here. She looked at the graves, then at the garden beginning to green with new growth. They are not gone. They live in the earth, in what grows, in what continues. She turned to him one last time, placing a small leather pouch in his hand. Plant these in the spring. They will bloom yellow, like the sun, like the flower on your boy's grave. Remember that after the hardest winter comes growth. Arthur watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller against the vast prairie. She never looked back. When she disappeared over the ridge, he stood alone but not empty. The ranch around him hummed with quiet life. Chickens scratched in their repaired coop. His horse nickered from the corral. The garden waited for his tending. He opened the leather pouch. Inside were seeds, small and dark, full of promise. Arthur walked to the garden and began to work, his hands steady in the soil. The sun climbed higher, warming his back. Somewhere a meadowlark began to sing. The sound no longer hurt. He thought of Martha, who couldn't carry a tune, of Thomas, who would have loved to help plant these mysterious seeds, of Nita, who had shown him that grief, like winter, was a season that could end. The ranch lived. He lived. It was enough. In the months that followed, Arthur became known as the rancher who had been saved by an Apache healer. Some people thought him foolish. Others saw the change in him, the way he helped his neighbors without judgment, the way he spoke of loss without bitterness. He never saw Nita again, but every spring when the yellow flowers bloomed, covering Thomas's grave in golden light, he remembered her words. Life continues. It grows from the hardest ground, in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people. What was a moment when a stranger's kindness changed you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of the Old West.